Good evening and welcome to our webinar on students and anxiety. We're happy to have you here with us this evening. We have created this webinar with the hope that this information will help you understand the impact of anxiety in the lives of your students. My name is Suzanne Leslie and I will be moderating our discussion this evening. Our mission statement at Learner's Edge, as you can see on the slide, is to create remarkable experiences that inspire educators and ultimately improve the quality of teaching and learning. Also, for those of you who are new to Learner's Edge, we want you to know that we do partner with universities to provide continuing education graduate credit courses, and we've been doing that for almost 20 years. We pride ourselves in helping teachers relicense, recertify, and help them move through their steps and lanes. We offer over 100 engaging and applicable graduate credit courses on today's important topics, and our online courses enable you to complete them whenever and wherever you please. Joining me in our discussion this evening is Jamie McNatt. As you can see on the screen, Jamie enjoys skiing, anything with a mountain and a ski lift. She is the co-founder of Pan-Ergic Life Foundation, a nonprofit that works with former Special Forces soldiers to combat PTSD and TBI. And TBI, Jamie, is traumatic brain injury. Yes, good for me. Using wilderness therapy. She has 18 years of experience in public education as a school social worker, and she's the owner and therapist with Truth North Therapy. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you.
So happy you're here tonight.
Good to be here.
Yay, we were just talking as we were getting ready this evening. We are broadcasting in Minnesota, and we are expecting, I think, a foot of snow on Friday. 8 inches? 8
inches.
feet.
Oh, I don't know. It's 8. I just saw an 8.
It's on 8. So 8 inches of snow on Friday. It's Wednesday. So we have one more day to get ready for it. We're just talking about, couldn't we broadcast from someplace warm and sunny? But here we are in Minnesota. All right. So our outcomes for this evening, as you can see, we want you to be able to understand anxiety and its purpose. We'll talk a little bit about how anxiety sometimes gets a bad rap, and actually it's something that we all need in order to navigate our lives. Have a healthy discussion about anxiety with your students. We want teachers to be able to do that. Also, how you can reflect on your own working definition of anxiety and discover how to implement strategies to build a common language around anxiety. So some different definitions, like I know we talk about one from the DSM-5. So Jamie, your turn.
Yes, so I will just start. A couple things I just want to clarify. Any anxiety presentation is going to be built more upon the anxiety that we feel and not the person that generally has an organic anxiety disorder, right? So when we talk about anxiety and the different definitions and how to counteract and how to really navigate and deal with, we're talking about, I'd say, the general population and not your really extreme cases where it's an organic mental health issue. So I want to state that. And then as a school social worker, I had the unique, at least in my district, of setup where I had my foot in a lot of different worlds. And so I worked very closely with the teachers, with the students, obviously, and then real closely with the admin world at district and in building. And so being able to see that mental health in general was obviously a topic that everyone knew and knew we needed to know about, but there was very little knowledge or effort on how to truly bring that into the classroom in an educational and proactive way. And so that's what I'm hoping we kind of cover here. So when we do listen to your body, I think I'm going to come back to this a couple different times, but the purpose of this slide is just remind you that our body actually talks to us. I mean, it's a bundle of nerves and it has a language and it's speaking to us, whether we get tense, feel butterflies, tightening of the stomach, a headache, hand clenching. So we're going to go back to that, but listening to your body, it's smarter than you, meaning our body is actually running the ship more than we realize. So keep that in mind.
And the slide, and we talked about this earlier too, Jamie and I did, there's actually a book that talks about dealing with trauma, and it's called Your Body, I can't remember.
Body Keeps Score?
Yes, that's
yeah,
the one,
absolutely.
Your Body Keeps Score.
Yeah.
Your Body Keeps Score.
And it does, yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we're looking at the definition, and I don't know, you guys can see these, so I don't know if I need to read them specifically, but when we look at anxiety with regard to definition, and again, I talk about that, the mental health and that true organic, the DSM definition is what I operate off of, what therapists operate off of, medical field. And that is a much more extreme situation. However, anxiety in and of itself, and that's what I hope to talk more about, is if we look at the evolutionary definition, it's life-sustaining. It's an emotion, a natural response to our life experience. That is something that we have gotten away from. The word anxiety really gets people revved up, but anxiety in and of itself is not supposed to feel comfortable. It's supposed to be life-sustaining, and it does have a purpose. And when we can understand it and control it, it is a natural emotion, just like happiness or any other emotion we feel on that scale. So we're gonna spend some time on evolutionary, the evolutionary definition, specifically immediate return environment and delayed return environment.
And Jamie, just to step in here, could you just talk briefly about whether or not you think the term anxiety has become a blanket term for so many different?
Yeah, so I get a lot of clients, and I work primarily with, in my practice, I work primarily with adolescents. And it's such a word now that it has very little meaning other than it's kind of a catch-all. And underlying anxiety is there's a lot of things that can contribute to that. Chronic stress is one of them, and how to navigate that, right? But anxiety is also spearheaded by just unknowns and not understanding the body responses, not knowing how to listen to your body, and not spending time dissecting those things. So yeah, I think it's become very misunderstood. And that's, again, the caveat. There are, truly anxiety people, people out there who truly have this diagnosis and navigate this on a daily basis. But generally speaking, anxiety is a very misunderstood concept. So in order to really understand anxiety and where it comes from, we have to understand why our brains do what they do and how they were built. Okay, so if we look at the instant return environment, and I say we're just going to take the mindset of a giraffe, right? If a giraffe is hungry, they eat. If a giraffe is tired, they sleep. If a giraffe recognizes danger, they run. Okay, so there isn't, the way our brain was built. We have a giraffe mindset. We are meant to function in an instant return environment, problem solving in the moment, not hanging on to the unknown. Okay, so knowing that for many, many years, and we'll see a slide on this, this is the world we operated in. Our brain has not been able to make the shift into what we would call now as the delayed return environment, which is our next slide. When we look at this, if we flip that script and we exit kind of giraffe mindset, right? And we go more into that human response. This would look something like, oh, look at that cool giraffe. This weather's perfect. Wouldn't it be nice if we could do this all the time? How do we afford that? Oh, speaking of afford, that I pay that bill? Well, should I look at, well, this job's not paying me much. Should I? And that's what the brain does, and it starts to work itself, right? And so this delayed return environment is now, we're built on this notion that we're working really hard for something that we have not yet had, right? So if we apply it to our paychecks, right? We're working really hard for 2 weeks for a paycheck that we're assuming is coming. We're hoping everything's in there. We're kind of worried maybe they forgot, especially in schools, maybe they forgot our Q comp, maybe they forgot whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're constantly looking at that. And then if you take it to a student, right, they're studying, they're doing homework in hopes of prepping for a test they have not received, and then taking a test for a grade that lives in the wind. So all of this stuff is very built on this delayed return environment, and our brains were not, that isn't how our brains have evolved.
It's like living in the gray. Yeah.
Correct.
Where the last slide is living in the black and white, now we're living in the gray. And so that creates some anxiety.
Right, which is why if you look at that immediate gratification, we get so frustrated with our kids and our teens because they just want what they want and they want it right now, which inevitably we all do. And so for you to, like, if anyone says that's not accurate for them, they're not being honest. But teens in particular, because of their lack of how impulsive they are, you have to understand that there is a level of that immediate gratification is in fact how our brain was built. This is what we want. How do we achieve this? Let me have this. This feels really good, because that is unfortunately how our brain is, but it's that way in a delayed return environment, which doesn't work.
Right. And I know I have done some reading about the prefrontal cortex, the brain, and how it's not fully developed. Now, researchers are saying until age 25.
Oh, yeah.
And that's our ability to control our impulses.
Right.
So that, coupled with the delayed return environment, really combines for some volatile feelings, I would imagine.
So this slide just depicts kind of what we have been talking about, but in a nutshell, right? So it's only really in the last 500 years and 100 years, if you really want to look at our modern like technology and just the real significant changes that our life really revolves around now, has really been in the last 100 years. And so if we look at 100 years, for example, right, and the lifespan, that's a lot that can happen. But when we look at 100 years in the lifespan of the human brain and just evolution, it's nothing, right? And so we've expected a lot of ourselves and our brain development in the world we're trying to keep up with, when in fact, we still have the hardwiring of that instant return environment, which again, there's the rub, right? And so when you get chronic stress, when you get anxiety, it's because you're living in that future moment, which is what society right now is really built upon. Now we have, you know, people running around with a lot of uncomfortable emotions.
Right, and as we get older, we learn strategies to deal with our anxiety. Like
Right.
as adults, we know that the feeling that I get when my mouth gets dry and I get butterflies, okay, I know what this is. This means I'm nervous about the unknown. So I have strategies now as at my age
Right.
to deal with that. But when you're a teen or a younger person, you're not necessarily as
Well, and
comfortable.
your strategies are developed based off muscle memory. I mean, they really
Mhm.
are, right? And so even though these kids are hearing these things, or even as adults, if there's a new concept, right, and you're hearing it, that's fine. But to actually apply it and reapply it, like that takes some concerted energy and effort and takes consistency, right? And school isn't always the optimal space in which to do that, because if it's not happening at home, that's 8 hours a day of a child's life, right? So it's a
Mhm.
significant amount of time, but very little time dedicated to these skill sets that we then implicitly expect them to have.
So as a therapist, Jamie, is that some of the time that you spend with these kids is explaining to them that what they're feeling is normal, and that when I see you clench your hands and when I see your
Right.
mouth get dry, I know this is what you're feeling and that's normal. That's what everybody feels.
Right.
Is that what you tell them?
Yeah, yeah. So, and even in the schools, right? Like one of the biggest things I would do is I would come into the classrooms and do education with the kids on the forefront of things. Because I found consistently that if you can do that, you build trust, right? But you build awareness. And once you have awareness, there's a level of, they're just able to have a different conversation at that point. So education on any end is fundamental. We had an at-risk program, an ALP, it's an alternative learning program that we started, that myself and another teacher started in our district. And one of the things, the founding things that was really set that district or that program apart was the education piece that we did with those kids. And people think alternative learning, right? They're going to think behavioral, they're going to think a lot of things, but it's completely not accurate if you take that time on the forefront to build that common knowledge and understanding. We never had a kid come out of there with a referral. We didn't have the outrageous behaviors. We simply did not, because they were aware, and even language-wise, they could articulate. Here's what I'm experiencing right now. I need 20 minutes. Or they would advocate in a really appropriate way. But time and time again, every year, that was found to be true of that program.
I know that in an upcoming slide, just in what you said, articulate how they're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're going to talk a little bit about the words, giving kids the words that they need.
Yes.
And I love what you just had to say about awareness as a big piece, and then trust.
Right.
You know, that ability that you have to build trust with these students. And then also you said something about parents, and if they're at school for 8 hours a day, but this isn't happening at home. So it's kind of that, kind of a quagmire there for, you know, if they're experiencing something different at home and not getting the tools they need to deal with anxiety, and then they're coming to school, hopefully that's where you can step in,
right.
and teachers can step in and help.
Yep. So let me just give you some background before you hear this slide, because it can be a little heavy. But this is when I talk about going into the classroom and talking to kids, like behavior is a language, right? And so if we break down behavior, it's actually, we're talking through our body, we're talking through what we do, but we don't always know obviously what behavior is saying, right? And so in order to do that, you have to figure out what is going on with your class, with that particular student, however you want to do it. I would go into the class and I would basically ask them, I would do some education on that instant, right? That instant gratification and that delayed return environment. And I'd ask them, what do you have in your delayed return environment? What do you have that you can't control, that's unknown, that you have felt really just lack of control? I mean, what's going on with you that you're carrying in your backpack to school with you, you know, an emotional backpack that we're unaware of. And this was an example of, but it was not unique to this class, but it was an example of a class.
Where is my dad? I wanted to take hard drugs. I once bought a gun and used it, threw it away, but I knew better. Insecure, I feel dumb, and there's a lot of pressure to be the best. I was adopted, my parents argue, and I have ADHD. My cousin tried to kill himself, and my aunt attempted suicide. My dad and I arguing, my friends and I arguing. Verbal abuse from parents, physical abuse.
I've been lonely. I've had thoughts of suicide. My parents argue.
Physical, verbal, and sexual abuse, self-medication, overdose on pills.
I hate my face and my body. I feel out of place.
I've had many friends try to commit suicide. My dad could die on any given day because of his health. Insecure, thoughts of suicide.
I have been mentally and physically abused. My father left me when I was a couple months old. I've cut and thought about killing myself. Anxiety and feared thoughts. Alcohol, dad, constant arguing. Suicidal thoughts, self-harm, insecurities, parents arguing.
Alcoholic, drug addict family, suicidal, broken family.
Lonely. I went through divorce.
I've wanted to kill myself. I feel like no one likes me. I've been called gay, stupid. My brother died at 2 months old. People always make fun of me. I wanted to kill myself. I'm always lonely.
Abandonment, suicidal thoughts. I am not loved. I am invisible. Depression, crippling anxiety.
Okay, so that was a pocket, obviously, right? A pocket population of students in a class, but I did not find that unique to that class. And so I think that's important to note. And what I would do is I would just ask them to type in, send it via technology in a protected manner. And then I had 4 or 5 students opt to read those answers, which is why you might have heard common voices there, and why you heard like chunks of things together. So when we talk about, again, what's different, right? What are our kids bringing? And that's kind of the next slide. But when we talk about what is different with how our students are coping versus maybe how we coped and how we navigated school, right? I tell people all the time, you could not pay me to go back, especially to middle school or high school. I mean, those are brutal. But children's brains, and I have this right there, they're not adult brains with fewer miles. And I think we lose sight of that. And again, we go back to those things that really frustrate us, right? Like the instant gratification, and why can't they pick up on a concept? And why are they responding that way? And behavior is a language, right? So it's all of those things. So when we look at what's different, technology, for example, okay? So, I mean, I have kids now and they're coming to therapy for, I am doing more a diagnosis of technology addiction than I ever have, right? And it's a true addiction, and it's because they have figured out algorithms and they have figured out ways to kind of really access those pleasure receptors of the brain for these kids. And it's a lot of it, like Instagram, Facebook, there's a lot of kind of trickery that goes along with that, right? Just brain science. And when you touch things with your fingertips, you're eliciting the feel good, right? Which is why we're very tactile. And so, you're constantly punching in and you're texting and you're constantly accessing those pleasure receptors in the brain. So it's everything about technology is hardwired for that, for our brains to just love it. But these kids aren't going to sleep, right? So they're not functioning normally. They have it in their pocket. They're living on it day and night. Instagram's famous for this. The kids, there's a lot of addictions with Instagram because they will withhold likes to kind of get that kid uncertain about like what was wrong with that picture, what was wrong with me. And then all of a sudden, an hour later, they'll release more likes that the kid really got with the first posting, which again accesses, it's an algorithm. It plays off of our desire for that instant and that delayed, right? But they have slumber parties now where I'll talk with clients and ask what they did over the weekend. They said, well, I had so-and-so sleepover and da-da-da. Great, what did you do? Well, come to find out, it's like all online, right? So they're FaceTiming each other and they're putting them by their pillow and they're like talking to each other as they all go to sleep, and then whoever wakes up first says, hey guys, and they wake each other up, right? But this is all done over technology. So, and they use these phones for I can't tell you how many times as a school social worker I hear from parents, well, I can't take the kid's phone away because that's their alarm clock. Okay, we'll get them an old alarm clock. But where do you buy an old alarm clock? Well, Amazon. I don't know. So, so technology is huge. Sleep, they're not getting enough of it.
Especially when they need it because their brains are developing.
Yep. And their brains are developing in a way that, I mean, and studies have shown this, research has shown that they aren't hardwired to go to sleep when we ask them to go to sleep. They are later sleepers.
That's true.
Later risers, you know. Longer working hours, that's true for both kids and parents.
Because we're always connected, right?
Yep. I mean, in general too, kids, I mean, they're getting more homework, I would say, because arguably when I was in the schools, if you look at any given classroom, the behaviors are larger, right? The demands on the teachers are more. They're not getting as much lesson time versus homework time just because of the way that plays out. Then they have sports if they do have sports. And then, you know,
jobs.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they're constantly navigating that. Parents are working longer to keep up with the demands that exist out there. You know, us versus them. I was just talking to a parent about this the other day, and it comes across that way to kids. And I think it's important to understand this, that even in, you know, I'm slightly removed from their generation. I say slightly with like a wink, right? But I have a foot in both worlds, right? My brain remembers a time where I had to call my mom from the quarter phone on the corner, you know, to let her know where I was. I remember a time where she couldn't track me down, you know. I mean, and I remember what that felt like. My body, my muscle memory knows that. And I also know what it's like to have a phone now and how quickly we become addicted to that, like fascinatingly so. And so the us versus them, the kids who've grown up now, right? If we take any school age kid at this point, there's no working knowledge of that comparison. And so us telling them like, this isn't normal, what are you doing? Like, it truly is talking about something that their brain has absolutely no context, no muscle memory of, no experience of. And so in order to truly give that to them, it's through exposure of, you know, off-grid type stuff, which is difficult because again, parents are working longer hours, taking trips, whatnot. So in us versus them it really does exist, which is why their circle of influence typically does not involve parents, teachers, right? Generally speaking, because they can't understand what we're saying to them, and we sound like we're just simply against them. Divided home, it's twofold, because I say divided home for the student because there is this kind of psychological term that we will use where who they want to be and who they are kind of crash into each other, and they're living a very divided and divisive kind of lifestyle within themselves because they know they don't want to be doing these things, and yet everyone is doing these things. And so that divided home exists even within their own body. And then the divided home, the literal term, that we have more separation now, we have more divorce now, right? We just do. And then I despise this word, so bear with me. I'm desensitization. But that, I mean, it's actually sad how true this is, because nothing shocks our kids anymore. And so consequences don't seem to matter. Really talking about morals, ethics, values, they don't really hit home the way they did. It just doesn't have the same meaning again as what we understand those things to mean, because it isn't everyday language. And even if you want to use it everyday language, right, you run up against what you can and can't talk about in schools as a teacher. And like, there's all these barriers now that exist to really raising a whole student. You know, it's compartmentalized. And so,
well, I think about decisions as you were talking about, you know, always being on our phones. I was thinking about how now, because we all have this, you know, we're all so connected. People go to the grocery store and they can't decide. You know, they have to text someone to say, which kind of pasta should I bring home? They have the purple pasta and they've got this curly.
Yeah.
You know, like, we can't just decide already because we have to check with everybody.
Right.
That piece. And then the other piece is how quickly things move, the news cycle. I mean, it's, you know, you get up in the morning, one thing's happening, and by noon, something else has happened, and you've already forgotten about what happened this morning.
Right.
It's just this constant barrage. So
It doesn't stop.
And I know we're going to talk about this too, Jamie, but I think that there's starting to be some pushback against technology. I've seen that happening. Parents are starting to say, we're going to take away your phones, we're going to get off social media, we're going to go outside, we're going to do family vacation, you know, all these different things are happening. So there is some headway there.
Well, it's hard, right? But then you know, let's take last year, for example, when I was still with the schools, and we'd have kids and they were flooded, they were overloaded, and we'll kind of talk about what that looks like, but you could tell they were done. And to have intellectual conversation at that point is forget it, right? But then you know, you tell them to pull it together, whatever I do my Band-Aid stuff on them because really that's all you have time to do in a school, right? We're slapping a Band-Aid on, we're trying to get them back. And it's a rub because the classroom teacher's like, please help me. But then they go back and it's get back on your technology because that's where their assignments are. That's what they're looking at. So it's never, I mean, to find a book and a pencil anymore and a paper is difficult.
Challenging.
It's very challenging. It's very, especially, and if they do something wrong on their iPad or their laptop from the school, right? Trying to find, I mean, I spent almost, I think, a month trying to track down just some like book stuff that this kid could then keep up with simply because we just lost the access to technology and we weren't equipped to then try to get him paper pencil again. You know, we just didn't have the resources that we had at one time. Where those all went, the Scantron tests, I don't know where those all went. Like they just, we couldn't wait to shred them. I don't know.
Okay.
Okay, so then we're still on that education piece. So if we do the window of tolerance, right, like this is one of the first things I would talk about with students. And this is an important concept and it's a good depiction of really what it breaks down to when we look at what our body can handle. The window of tolerance, what that means is that it's our body's way of gauging and navigating uncomfortable emotion, right? So this is different for everyone. Generally speaking, we make the assumption on any given day that we wake up at a 0 on like a 10-point scale, right? 10 being really stressed out. But for most kids, anyone under the age of 19, arguably they wake up around a 6 or a 7. Now, even adults, we know what that's like if we go to bed with kind of a heavy head or we have just things that are sitting on us, right? That means that window of tolerance then to get to that 10 is a couple steps. So when teachers would often say like, that kid just blows out of nowhere, you know, no, it wasn't out of nowhere. He went to sleep at a 7, right? He woke up at a 7, something set him off. He blew up at a 10, but it took him very little to get there because his window of tolerance is very little, right? So when we talk about that, and I want to preface that there are some things that physiologically happen to your body when you go outside your window of tolerance. And this is important for teachers. I would do a lot of education with our teachers around this. The little things you need to look for, right? So as a classroom teacher, if you're kind of watching your classroom, you can start to see, obviously right away, you recognize the kids, right? We all do, who are going to offer a little bit of struggle, right?
Keeps us on our toes.
Yes, right? What we tend to overlook are the signs that their body is telling us, right? Again, behavior is a language, your body's communicating. I'll give you a perfect example. As adults, we are cautioned all the time when we're doing like public speaking or we're presenting, right? Don't cross your arms, right? Well, we're going to learn later on that that's actually called containment and it's a skill. And what that is demonstrating is we're trying to subconsciously remind ourselves that we're actually okay, housed in our body. We're creating a boundary for our own selves. And it's actually quite healthy. But again, it's because it looks so standoffish, we interpret it that way, right? Things that will happen when a kiddo gets out of their window of tolerance. You will start to see, pacing. You might see more, a lot of really noisy yawning. And again, that's generally thought of as to be disrespectful. But again, we go subconsciously. Your brain is attempting at that point to suck in as much oxygen as possible and to get out as much carbon dioxide as possible. And so noisy, I mean, sure, do some kids amplify that? Of course, right? But we tend to yawn when we are reaching that wall or that window of tolerance. And so just little things like that, right? But what's actually happening interior on the inside of our body, if a heart rate goes up above 90, right, we're what we call flooded on a psychological level. And what that means is we get tunnel vision, right? We hyperfocus. You might start to try to reach in and lean in and comfort that kiddo, but now that looks like an aggressive movement. Fight or flight kicks in. There's no real rationalizing around that. I mean, that's not something that when that happens, it actually, you can't argue yourself out of it. It'd be like going outside and saying, please stop raining. It's physiological. Our body just does these things. Having a conversation when you're side to side with someone, if they're flooded, that's really, really bad because you get hyper-focused. So tunnel vision, you're looking ahead, not to the side, right? So now you represent almost a danger, an alert the brain is sending off. which is why it's so important when you get right in front of someone when they're talking. So there's all these things, right? I think one of the biggest things that happens though is that we lose our ability to pull on memory and positive emotion. So I can have a really amazing relationship with a teacher, but if I come in at a 7, something triggers me, I get flooded, and now that teacher tries to approach me, fight or flight kicks in. I have lost that ability to access that particular positive memory. Mm-hmm. So when we look at window of tolerances, and I can talk on this for hours, but I won't, but there's a lot that goes into that.
Just quickly, I think one of the most important things that you said in this segment right here is the fact that our kiddos, as you call them, it's so cute, show up to school at a 7, a 10, a 4, whatever. And I know that we talked about this previously, Jamie, but so do we as teachers.
Absolutely.
So do we as educators. We show up, and I guess I never thought about that. I'm so focused on my students that I never thought, well, I'm arriving at a 3 or a 7 or maybe even a 10, depending on what happens.
I would have teachers come into my office who knew they had a pretty rowdy first or second hour, and I would put the pulse ox on them just to gauge their pulse. Mm-hmm. And more times than you can imagine, they were actually in the hundreds. So already they were flooded. And
Jamie's referring to an actual pulse ox, which is a way to measure someone's pulse. And so she actually has one in her office, and she'd have the teachers measure their pulse, and they would be.
And I would do that as a tool for the kids too, because they always inevitably say that breathing crap doesn't work for me or whatever, right? And I'm like, really? Well, let's just do 2 minutes of breath. Let's watch what the pulse says.
And see it come
and then
down.
Let's see, right? So then that's how you get their buy-in. But I had to do that with teachers too, you know, to get their buy-in. So this slide we're going to go into emotions, right? So again, educating kids, right? This is all about how do you educate kids, but in doing so, educating you guys. We are not born with like a template of emotion, like people think we are, right? Emotions, what our brain does, it's 2 things. It collects memory, or it stores memory, and then it makes predictions, right? So emotions are built upon memory and prediction. So what this is demonstrating right here, right? And I just kind of want you to try to see what this is. If you don't know what it is, if you can't tell what it is, if you just see a bunch of black and white kind of things, right? That is called experiential blindness. You don't have the experience or the knowledge. Your brain right now is not saying, what is this? Your brain is saying, what does this look like? And it's going through every file that it has, and it's going to associate, what does this look like? What does it look like? If it cannot do that, because it has never had the experience or anything that resembles that, then you have what we call experiential blindness. That is anxiety. Okay, so think about that for your students in your class. If they've never had a positive interaction, if they've never had a successful test, if they've never really, whatever it may be, that's experiential blindness. They're responding now based on fight or flight. They don't know what this is in front of them. That's anxiety producing. Now my body is flooded and I'm feeling all these things, okay? So if we go to the next slide, I'm gonna give you some context, right? So now I've just filled it in. So hopefully you're seeing a snake, right? Because your brain, you have new information, right? So your brain just categorized this. It didn't say, oh, this is what it is. It said, this is what it is like. Right, so again, it's stored memory and predictions. That's what emotion is. So you can see them side by side. And what the brain does now is it actually will allow you to see a snake really where there isn't a snake, because I've given you context with the colored version of it. And that's really what emotion and anxiety, and how do you demonstrate to kids, you're feeling this way, you're feeling anxious about being anxious because you don't know what's expected. You haven't had this experience yet. Okay, so if we go into skills, right? And you guys, this is a very fast version of this, so bear with me. But if we go into skills, there's a couple of, again, I'm a therapist, right? So these are going to sound very therapeutic. However, I was also a social worker in a school for 18 years. And so I know the benefit of this. I know that you can get this happening in your classroom. Your buy-in is more important than the kids. They watch you. But if you do this on the forend, if you take some time to do the education piece on the forend of things, you will have an easier time with that class in general, as far as at least the majority, right, of understanding that they're actually in control and presenting these skill sets to them. And if not, if there's just no comfortability in that, or you're just not in a position to do that for your own self, right? And I only use skills that are backed by research, because that's just how my brain works. I mean, I'm a trauma therapist, and so I mean, I deal with data research, right? So we're going to walk you through what these are. Each of them has a slide, so I think we can kind of probably go to the next. So when we look at a list of emotions, okay, this was something I would do. I would do this with high school kids. I would do this with elementary. I would do this with middle. It didn't really matter. Almost inevitably, every single time, it was very obvious that we don't spend a lot of time talking about emotion and emotional awareness, right? So we go back to that word desensitization, and we talk about the how kids are desensitized to the negative things so that they're not shocking anymore. This would be almost a positive way of incorporating that in, because if you flood, I shouldn't use flood because I'm using that in a different terminology. If you teach enough emotion and what it is and where it sits in your body, it's not shameful anymore, right? So it loses that power. Like to say I'm jealous, I feel betrayed, I feel victimized, right? Those are words that are really heavy that a lot of our kids don't really understand. And if I talk to any middle school kid and I ask if they were jealous, they're going to shoot back no, right? Because there's shame associated to that. So we're very comfortable with anger, sadness, anxiety, hurt, embarrassment, happy, right? Those are very comfortable. I can say I'm angry and whatever version we want to say of that word. But anger actually is derived from shame and guilt and some really heavy, heavy emotions, right? So that's why it's very hard to get out of anger once you feel it. It's hard to walk away from it because we're not really dealing with anger. That's a camouflage emotion. We're dealing with shame. We're dealing with hurt.
Mm-hmm.
What did I do wrong? And that's usually the internal voice. What did I do wrong here? Why wasn't I worth it? What was wrong with me? And kids are no different from humans. So are humans. Kids are humans. Kids are humans.
Adults.
Info alert. Yeah, adults. If you think about how we would feel in any given situation, apply that to those students. I mean, right? So I would go in and we would talk about what emotions are at the beginning of the school year. Here's what they are. Here's what they look like. Here's how they feel. Where do they live in your body? I'd have them fill out just a body form to kind of see where do you feel these emotions. When you feel anger, where is it? Okay, well, it lives, a lot of people would say it lives in my hands, or it lives, my face gets red, or yeah, right? So it was just diagnosing kind of themselves and where their body operates, just to give that foundation. Okay, so that's a really healthy strategy to do, because then when you talk to them and they say, well, I'm pissed, or why didn't you do that homework assignment? Well, because you can really get more down to really what it is. Well, I didn't do it because I was afraid I was going to get them all wrong. Okay, well, tell me more about that. So, and you don't always have time to do this, classroom teachers. Like, I don't want to minimize the fact that busy, right? But then at least it's a stepping stone so that the social worker or the counselor, something for them to work with.
But even front loading your class and talking about this in the beginning of the year, and sometimes throughout, or maybe 3 times throughout the year, giving them the vocabulary to name what they're feeling. I think it's so powerful. And I mean, as an adult myself, I look at these and I feel like I should have this, up on my wall, because sometimes I'm not able to name my emotions, but here are the words that we need to explain what we're feeling.
Well, and especially like if you look at anxious, right? I mean, there's so many that fall under there. You're really, and that's what I would end up telling kids, like, okay, let's really look at this. Are you anxious or are you uncomfortable? Why are you uncomfortable? Okay, well, I'm feeling confused about this situation, or I'm feeling, okay, well, let's talk about that, because we can control that, right? We can't control anxiety.
Right.
So these are things, if you can take the front end of something and tackle a list of emotions and really look at them, it produces results.
I think it's very worthy of everyone's time to have that list handy.
Okay, so with breath work, there's videos that you can find online for this. These were 2 videos. They're not working, so I'm going to talk through them. Boxed breathing is, and this is how I get the buy-in, especially from my middle school kids, with boxed breathing. That is what Special Forces, SEALs, that's what our elite military uses as a way to calm their nervous system. Box breathing will look like a box, right? So I always start with a breath of 4, and you have your 4 corners of a box, and that's why I choose 4, because it's easy for kids to remember. And you would start it with holding your breath for 4, inhaling for 4, holding that for 4, exhaling for 4. And so you end up walking around the box, and it's a hold, breathe in, hold, breathe out. So if you do that for a minute therapeutically for muscle, and again, we're shooting for muscle memory, right? Because everybody is going to reach fight or flight. Any kid sitting in your classroom is only 2 steps away, in my opinion, from reaching that flooded point, okay? So we're looking for, in the moment when we lose our ability to trust the person that's communicating to us, when we lose the ability to see positive memory and association, and we can't find the Broca area to really, in the brain, right, to describe how we're feeling, because when we get flooded, we can't access like word, really intelligent word, right? Sentence structure.
It's almost like we black out in a way.
Well,
in
you
a
become
sense.
primal. It's because it doesn't matter, right? If I turn to the dinosaur and I say, please don't eat me, or whatever, right? That's, who cares, right? So that's not, it's not necessary for that. It's why the other parts of our body shut down during that time as well. So digestion, all of that. So for box breathing though, if you do this, if you do 3 times a day, 4 breaths in a row for 2 weeks, you've created muscle memory, and your body will naturally, subconsciously start to go to that because it will feel calm. Okay. So people will say, I feel happy. No, you don't. It's not happy. Again, we go back to that terminology, right? You feel calm, and that's a good feeling. So box breath, it's 4 corners, 4. Okay. 4, 7, 8 is a more therapeutic breath. This guy is really great. 4, 7, 8 is a little bit harder, especially for younger kids. High school kids really get 4, 7, 8. They like it. Middle school in between, I think they probably prefer more box breath. This one is you breathe in for 4, you hold 7, and then you release 8. And when you release, on all of your releases, you're actually breathing out of your mouth to get rid of that carbon dioxide. You're not breathing out of your nose. And you're trying to do diaphragm breathing, right? So I'm a chest breather, for example. This is really good for me because when I breathe, I tend to raise my shoulders because I'm chest breathing, and that's not therapeutic breath, right?
Get real deep into your
right. And so music teachers teach this beautifully. So we would have the music teachers in our school. When we would get the kids together, we would do some mental health days where we would do some skill sets because it was vitally needed, right? They teach this really well. So anyone who knows how to do that diaphragm breathing. But 4, 7, 8 is more what we call a heart math or a therapeutic breath. It's a rhythm, and it correlates with what our body wants to do on a therapeutic level when we're triggered, when our nervous system's on fire. Box breathing is it's systematic, right? So it's just they're just different breaths. I tend to give both and ask the students to choose.
So I just want to ask you quickly, I know we have a few more slides to get through, but what kind of results do you see? So I know that there is some skepticism from some.
Right.
There can be skepticism from parents, from administrators, from the students, even from the teachers. But you said that you work out of their place of research and what the brain does. Right. So when there's that skepticism, how do teachers or others that are skeptical about this, I like the word skepticism.
Yeah.
How do you help them with that? How do you promise them that there's going to be a result? What kind of?
Well, so I would show them, right? I would just hook them up to the pulse ox. So you can't argue. Like physiologically, your body is responding to this. How do you argue with that, right? If you dip below 90 and you're now in the 80s because of the only thing you've changed is how you're breathing. You can't argue with that. And so that for me was very easy to get the buy-in of my staff, my admin, my students, right? Because I just would go scientific. I think with anything, you're going to have resistance, right? Hopefully, I mean, this is the one thing that we are absolutely in control of. It's the one thing that time and time again has been shown in research to be the only way to really access mindfulness and present moment and getting back to what our brains desire, which is that instant, right? It's instant. We get instant gratification when we work on our breath, because oftentimes we're more shallow than we realize. We have more carbon dioxide than we realize, and we can't oxygenate our body the way we need to get back online.
So we've been offering some courses on mindfulness, blended learning courses in the evenings this last summer, and we'll offer another one this spring and then more this summer. And the teachers that I've spoken to and that have sent me, chats and emails and all that are telling me that it is working with their students. Like they were not sure. They weren't sure about buying in. They thought they would try it. They said, we're going to try it for a month. the students were kind of giggly and not really sure, but the teachers were role modeling and saying, well, let's try it. Let's be serious about it. Let's see if it works. And these students are saying it's really
Yep.
helping them. What a
Especially when you
wonderful
do
skill.
it, when you do it before test. But it's, yeah, I mean, it's physiology. You cannot argue with what your body is saying.
Mhm.
So your mind can argue as much as you want, but if you hook someone up and you have them do breath, their body will respond. Then you can't argue with that.
It's wonderful.
Okay, so more strategies. So containment, right? We talked about that. So containment is where there are times where you've lost the ability because you're flooded right now, right? You're overwhelmed, you're over 90, your body is responding in a primal way. You lose sight of the fact that you are absolutely okay, that your body is the container for everything you need and you are okay. And so containment is actually different holds that you can do on yourself to bring combine it with breath work is what I would suggest. But oftentimes if I can't do box breathing in a comfortable way if I have a room full of people kind of looking at me and I'm on the spot, it would be odd if I just held my breath for 4 seconds, while someone's asking me a question. I will often do some containment, and that will look like crossing my arms. That to me is one of the easiest. I tell my students when I was working with them, cross your arms if you need to, remind yourself, contain yourself. The most powerful one that you can do that your brain really responds to, your brain, your body, and it goes into heart math again, because again, our body is a bunch of nerves and they feel and our fingertips feel, is the one, number 3, when you access your heart and your head and you do the breath work. And even if you're doing it at home right now, like if you just try this, you can instantly you will feel something. You will feel like just the pressure of your hands on your head and on your heart. Your body, your nervous system responds immediately.
I feel like I'm protecting myself. I'm
Mhm.
caring, loving myself.
Mhm.
I know that might sound a little
Yeah.
corny, but that's how I'm sitting here right now next to Jamie doing that number 3, and that's my initial
Yep.
instinct. Is it feels like I'm caring for myself.
And you
protecting
tag that with breath. So what I would tell my students is just act like you have a headache. I mean, just kind of hold your head for a little bit. If you can't get it on your heart, because then that really looks like you're doing something weird. Just get a hand on your head and just act like you're rubbing your head. There are different strategies that I would use with them, but when the students, and I worked with some heavy hitters, right? Some really heavy hitters that teachers, they were the ones that they got talked about in the staff lounge. I mean, these were the kids that was like, oh dear Lord, please don't put this child in my class, right? And this worked every single time with these kids because they just had to remind themselves that they were okay, they were in their body, they were reminded that like with breath, I can get myself back online.
Well, maybe no one's ever talked to them about this before.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
they don't, it's just a skill set, like you said earlier. They don't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
And this is giving them something to do.
So slow down thinking is it's mindfulness. It's that idea of getting back into your brain, right? So with slow down thinking, you will take a mantra or a phrase, whatever you'd like to do. Mine tends to be the one that I would work with kids would be, I'm okay. So as you breathe in, as you inhale, you would in your brain say, I'm. And as you exhale, you would say, okay. And it can be anything. So when I'm working with athletes, right? When I'm doing the nonprofit stuff and I'm out doing wilderness treks with, some really intense military guys, it's what do you need to say to yourself right now, right? And it's that concept that stop listening to yourself and start talking to yourself. Because when we listen, we are much more negative when we have our head voice, right? But when we talk out loud, if we said half the things out loud that we said on the inside just to ourselves, we would never say those things because people would look at us like, what is wrong with you? Like, why are you doing that to yourself? So it's that concept. It's talking to ourselves in a way that's very loving and reassuring, and we're doing breath at the same time, and it's very simple. It's very easy to do. I use I'm okay. My soldiers use something much more graphic or different, right? Which, right? And kids,
Because they're adults,
right?
and they can do that.
And they can, right? But when I would work with students, I would actually help find this for them because this was a foreign concept to them. What do you like? You mean talk positively to myself. So I would help find the phrase that felt the best, and this is what we would utilize. So
I bet they stand a little taller after they do the I'm okay. I bet it makes them.
Yep, I'm okay is an easy one. It's an easy phrase. It's easy to remember. They would do it a lot during tests. And we ran studies on kids. Those tests were better. So nothing changed but that for them. Muscle relaxation. I call this clench and release, but if you say that to a bunch of middle school kids, they don't enjoy that name, and I don't really know why. But muscle relaxation, this is one of the most effective things I have ever done. I will try to walk you through it. It would be easier if I could actually like demonstrate this to you guys, but let's see how good I am at communicating. So your brain and your body, they work together, right? Your brain cannot hold on to a negative, anxious thought if it is telling your body to release. It cannot do those two things at once. Okay, so in forcing our body to release a hold, our brain has to also then clench and release that thought. Okay, so how you would do this, how I start when I'm working with clients or kids or teachers, I do this with a lot of teachers, believe it or not, you would start with your toes. Okay, so and everything is in two. So you work your way up your body. So in a way, it's a body scan and you're moving up and your body will tell you where it felt really good. And that's also then where you're holding tension. Okay, so you start with your toes, you curl them in, do a breath, like one breath in, one breath out, right? And then you release your toes and spread them out. So you really spread them at that point. Everything's going tense because you're releasing. You bring them right back in with breath and then you release. Okay, and you work your way up your body. And you do your calf by pointing the toe and kind of, getting that calf muscle. And then you can do your thigh. And then you can do, your core, right? And then you work your way all the way up. And at the very end, and kids always laugh at this, but you kind of scrunch your face up and release and scrunch your face up and release. But it takes very little time. It takes about 2 minutes when you do it to completion. And by the time you're done, you will feel very relaxed again, because your brain cannot instruct your body to do something and also hold on to that negative, anxious thought. It has to go present moment with it. So that's a good one. And again, you can do it at your desk, you can do it on the floor, you can do it really wherever. I do with clients sitting up all the time. I did it with students in their desks.
Yoga, I would imagine, is,
And this one's a little less true sometimes. There's desk yoga. This one kind of just quickly scans the body. And then when you find that spot that feels really good, that would be the one that I would tell the kids to do. So if I have a kid who says, well, that toe one really felt good. Okay, that's the one that you're doing then when you start to feel these emotions in your body, right? Or the hand clenching, that one felt really good. Great. Do that underneath your desk when you really need to, and then let it go, right? So that's just a really good strategy. And the breath combined with it obviously is hugely impactful. Okay, and then I put this in here because
you wanted to show us your shoes.
Right. My polka dot shoes. Because again, I was in the school systems for 18 years. Okay, there are plenty of stories I have where I'm not proud of how I handled things. I'm not proud of the way I handled a kid. I'm not proud of the way I handled a teacher. I'm not proud of the way I handled a parent. Because I was flooded and I was responsive. And instead of owning that, there are a few that I would really, if I could find those students today, I would apologize to them in a really meaningful way, because I don't think I needed to do or respond the way I did. And I think we have more worth to these kids than we realize, because they're with us so much, and they think we're very knowing and knowledgeable and intelligent, and they may look at us sometimes as though we are less than, and they make that very visual to us, and they don't like us, but there is a level of almost reverence or respect for teachers. There really is. When I talk, again, doing it for 18 years, and I get the pleasure of being in the kids' mind, all ages, and what they think is very opposite to what we actually think they're thinking. Absolutely. And we matter so much to them. And so really checking yourself, that self-reflection. Do you feel like you are flooded? Do you feel like is that really the hill you want to die on, right? Are you now embarrassing that kid? Are we really pushing the boundaries of what are you really wanting them to gain from this, right? I tell teachers and I tell kids, I tell parents, 20 minutes is vital. Once we have reached 90 and above on a psychological or that physiological level, right? We have to do 20 minutes of something else. We have to, because it takes 20 minutes for all of the chemicals that the brain releases when you're in fight or flight, cortisol, norepinephrine, adrenaline, right? All those things that make us non-functioning as like really empathetic, compassionate people. Takes 20 minutes for all of those chemicals to then get into our tissue, into our urine tract, to dilute enough to get our frontal lobe back online, okay? So if I'm engaging with a student and I have not given myself enough time and I'm flooded, I'm pushing something that doesn't need to be pushed, right? Nothing's as important as maintaining the integrity of that classroom and the integrity of that child. So that's why I put that on here, because I think as adults, it's our obligation in that profession to do self-assessment.
Well, I love what you had to say about, I wrote it down, we matter to kids, and by that you were saying teachers matter to kids, that relationship, the fact that you, like you said, have been able to be inside these kids' heads for 18 years, and you've, learned so much over the years. That is really important. Well, it's a really important piece. I just want to make sure that everybody who's listening right now to this webinar hears that sometimes our perception by their behavior, because behavior is a language, is not the same as what they're thinking, which is, I respect you, you're important to me.
Well, and generally speaking, we get emotional. If we're apathetic to something, we truly don't care. We don't have an emotion. Right. It's very like numbed out, right? But when we have an emotion, when we get an emotion, it is because we were triggered, because there's meaning there. Like that's just the psychological understanding of why we respond to people the way we do. Somehow they accessed us in some way, right? So, I mean, you can have a student who had a bad experience with a teacher in kindergarten and still remember that and talk about that as a 12th grader. Like, we matter to them. So, I mean, yeah, that has never deviated. No matter how many years I've done what I've done, that one sentence has always remained true. Okay, so we put this poem up for you, and I am going to read this out loud because it has, again, I think it's a worthy poem to hear.
Before you read it, Jamie, I just want you to, you share this with your students.
I do. Right? So I share this with my students, and I share this with teachers and parents, because parents live in very fear-based thinking of like, I've got to get my kid ready for the future. I can't, right? Teachers are the same way. I have so many teacher friends, and I was enveloped into that world where the weight of pushing that kid, of getting that kid where they need to get for the next grade or the next, right? Like getting them ready for high school, getting them ready for middle school, like getting them ready for first grade, right? All of that it's so futuristic thinking that we lose sight of the present moment. And when we start, so depression lives in the past, right? Depression is I shoulda, coulda, woulda. And anxiety is the what if, and what if they're not, and right. So it's only those two things that really take us down. And this is what this says, really. So there are 2 days in every week about which we should not worry. 2 days which should be kept free from fear and apprehension. One of these days is yesterday, with its mistakes and cares, its faults and blunders, its aches and pains. Yesterday has passed forever beyond our control. All the money in the world cannot bring back yesterday. We cannot undo a single act we performed. We cannot erase a single word we said. Yesterday is gone. The other day we should not worry about is tomorrow, with its possible adversaries, its burdens, its large promise, and poor performance. Tomorrow is also beyond our immediate control. Tomorrow's sun will rise either in splendor or behind a mask of clouds, but it will rise. Until it does, we have no stake in tomorrow, for it is yet unborn. This just leaves only one day, today. Any person can fight the battles of just one day. It is only when you and I add the burdens of those two awful eternities, yesterday and tomorrow, that we break down. It is not the experience of today that drives people mad. It is the remorse or bitterness for something which happened yesterday and the dread of what tomorrow may bring. Let us therefore live but one day at a time. David Cullinan.
Good stuff. Just to wrap up this evening, first of all, thank you everyone for joining us. The 4 big takeaways that I took notes on as you were talking, Jamie, number 1, behavior is a language. Number 2, all of this is physiological and research-based. The I'm okay strategy to me was very meaningful and simple to do. And then lastly, I already commented on this, but that we teachers, we matter to kids, and that just feels really good. So thank you again for joining us. We will email you with a link tomorrow so you can download your certificate of completion for 1 hour of professional development. And then all of our webinars are on the Learner's Edge website. This one won't be available until sometime tomorrow after we have to download it and get it on our website. So give us a little bit of time to do that in case you want to listen to it again or share it with friends or family. Also, we do offer a course. It's course 5102. It's called Anxiety Awareness, Empowering Students with Help and Hope. And it's based on the film Angst. It's an IndieFlix film. So if you Google indieflix.com, you can find out more about that film called Angst. And then next week, we'd love for you to join us for our webinar on Wednesday. Again, so 1 week from tonight, again at the same time, Central Time, 6:30 Central to 7:30. We'll be talking about anxiety in teachers. And then the following week, we'll be talking about anxiety in students.
Schools.
I'm sorry, anxiety in schools. I can't read. So we appreciate your participation in our conversation about anxiety in students. Again, we will email you tomorrow with a link to your certificate of completion. Please join us next Wednesday at 6:30 Central Time for a second webinar, Anxiety in Teachers. Until then, good night from Minnesota.
Good night.